Hello, and welcome back to another episode of The Wildfires, the podcast where we unpack the people side of MSP life. I'm your host, Jane Matthews, founder of Wildcat Careers, where I work exclusively with MSPs to fix broken hiring processes, build cultures people actually want to work in, and help teams succeed. Today, I'd like to start with a question. When does September hiring actually begin? Now, most people would probably say September. I'd argue it begins in August, sometimes earlier, because by the time you've got an urgent vacancy, well, you're already behind. Now, before anyone panics and thinks I'm suggesting you should always be recruiting, I'm not. I'm talking about something much bigger than recruitment. I'm talking about preparation, because preparation has an interesting habit. You see, it often looks unnecessary right up until the moment you, desperately need it. One thing I've noticed after years of working exclusively with MSPs is this. September has a reputation. Everyone comes back from holidays, projects restart, customers suddenly remember everything they wanted doing before Christmas, and budgets get signed off. Sales teams become more active, and that pipeline begins filling again. Businesses that felt relatively calm in August suddenly become incredibly busy. And almost every year I hear the same sentence. Jane, we need to recruit as quickly as possible. Sometimes it's said calmly. Sometimes it's said with a slight sense of panic. Sometimes it's accompanied by a laugh that says, we're in trouble. But here's the question I always find myself asking. What actually changed? Did the vacancy suddenly appear overnight? Usually not. Did the workload double in a single afternoon? Well, probably not. Did the engineer suddenly wake up and decide to resign without giving any warning? Again, usually not. You see, more often than not, the signs have been there for months. An engineer has mentioned feeling ready for something new. Projects had gradually increased. The service desk had become a little busier every week. You see, the technical director had, quietly started taking on more escalation. The senior engineers had stopped booking annual leave because they didn't feel that they could. And, overtime had become normal. Nobody noticed because it happened slowly. September didn't create the pressure. Well, it simply exposed it. And I think that's an important distinction because, pressure and surprise aren't the same thing. Something can feel sudden without actually being sudden. And sometimes September is simply the moment reality catches up with us. Think of it like it's a bit like driving a car. The fuel warning light doesn't suddenly appear because the engine has developed a fault. It's been heading in that direction for miles. The warning is simply telling you you've now reached a point where you need to do something. Recruitment works exactly the same way. Stay with me on this. Vacancies rarely appear out of nowhere. Most of the time they've been building quietly in the background. We just haven't had the space to notice. I think that's something many MSP leaders accidentally misunderstand. You see, urgency rarely arrives without warning. It usually whispers before it shouts. The problem is, most MSPs are incredibly busy businesses. You're solving customer issues, managing engineers, keeping projects moving, dealing with suppliers, supporting clients, looking after, trying to grow. You're making hundreds of decisions every single week. So it's completely understandable that future planning sometimes gets, pushed down the list. The problem is that the future doesn't wait. One of the things I admire most about great MSPs is how proactive they are with technology. They don't wait until a customer's server completely fails before suggesting a replacement. They monitor performance, they identify trends, they look for warning signs, they recommend upgrades before disaster happens, because prevention is almost always cheaper than reaction. And everyone understands that. Nobody argues with proactive maintenance. Yet somehow, when it comes to people, many businesses still operate reactively. It's fascinating, really. We'll happily spend hours discussing capacity planning, disaster recovery, cybersecurity, business continuity, risk registers, project forecasting, all incredibly sensible. But when somebody mentions workforce planning, it suddenly feels optional, almost like we'll figure it out later. The reality is, your people are every bit as important as your technology, arguably more so. Because, without the right people, None of that technology matters. Think about the last time your service desk felt stretched. Did it happen in one day, or did it slowly creep up? One extra ticket here, another customer there, a couple more projects, an engineer off sick, someone helping sales with pre-sales, some holiday cover. Nothing dramatic, just tiny increases. Individually, they don't seem significant. Collectively, they completely change the workload. The same thing happens with recruitment, with hiring. One engineer starts talking about progression. Another asks for flexibility. Senior member of the team begins mentoring instead of delivering. Somebody's commute is wearing them down. Another person's partner gets offered a job somewhere else. Each event feels relatively small, but together, they're all telling you something. Your business is changing, whether you've acknowledged it yet or not. And here's something I think really is worth remembering. Recruitment isn't just about replacing people who left. Sometimes it's about recognizing that the business you've become needs different people from the business you were 2 years ago. And that's a very different conversation. Maybe you've grown. Maybe your customers are larger. Maybe projects have become more complex. Maybe your technical director is still doing work they should have delegated years ago. Maybe your engineers are technically brilliant, but now they're spending half their time mentoring junior staff. Your organization, well, it evolves, and your hiring should evolve with it. One of the biggest myths in recruitment is that speed starts when you advertise. It doesn't. Speed starts long before anyone writes a job description. It starts with preparation. It starts with asking better questions. It starts with clarity. Because if you don't know exactly what you're looking for, the market certainly won't know either. I often see businesses lose weeks before they've even spoken to a single engineer. Not because candidates aren't available, because internally they're still trying to answer questions that they could have answered months earlier. What do we call the role? Do we actually need another engineer? Could automation solve some of this? Should this person be client-facing? What's the salary? Should they come into the office? Who makes the final decision? How many interviews are we doing? Those conversations aren't wrong. They're important. They just become much harder when they're happening underneath the pressure of an urgent role to fill. There's something else I've noticed. Pressure changes behavior, and not always for the better. When leaders feel under pressure, decision-making tends to move to one of two extremes. Everything becomes rushed, or everything slows down. You see, one person wants to hire the first decent person they meet. Someone else becomes terrified of making the wrong decision. The interview process grows from 2 stages to 4. Many people become involved. Everybody wants another option, and that momentum disappears. Neither approach is particularly helpful. Both are reactions. Neither is preparation. And that's why I believe recruitment is often a leadership exercise before it's ever a recruitment exercise. The strongest hiring processes usually exist because leadership teams have already agreed how they'll make decisions. Who's responsible? Who's accountable? What good looks like? And what they're not willing to compromise on. When that's already decided, recruitment becomes remarkably straightforward. Not easy, but much calmer. And calm businesses nearly always make better hiring decisions than chaotic ones because confidence is attractive. Candidates notice it. Your team notices it. Confidence creates momentum. Confusion creates hesitation, and hesitation is expensive. So perhaps the real question isn't, when should we start recruiting? Perhaps it is, when should we start preparing? Because they're two very different things, and one almost always comes before the other. Now, I want you to imagine 2 MSPs. Both lose an engineer at exactly the same time. Both receive the resignation letter before 9 o'clock on a Monday morning. Both have similar customers, similar sized teams, similar revenue, similar technical challenges. From the outside, they look almost identical, don't they? But what happens next couldn't be more different. The first leadership team immediately start asking questions. What should the job title be? Do we actually replace this person? Or do we restructure instead? What's the salary? Can we afford more? Can we afford not to? Should this role be hybrid, remote, office-based? Who's writing the advert? Who speaks to the recruiter? Who's reviewing CVs? Who's interviewing? Should HR be involved? How many stages of interviews should there be? Who signs off on the offer? Who has the final say? Every one of those questions is perfectly, got my teeth out, reasonable. And none of them are wrong. The problem is they're all being answered under pressure. And pressure, whether you like it or not, changes how we think. Now, imagine the other MSP. Exactly the same resignation, exactly the same challenge, but this time the conversations have already happened. The role has been defined. The salary has already been benchmarked. The interview process already exists. Everyone knows who owns each stage. The recruiter receives a briefing within hours. CVs are received the next day. Interviews are booked. The team still feels the pressure of losing someone, but they're not also carrying the weight of uncertainty because they've already done the thinking. Which business do you think recruits with more confidence? Not because they're luckier, not because there are more engineers available, because they've removed unnecessary decisions. That's what preparation really does. It doesn't eliminate problems, just reduces confusion. And confusion is one of the biggest hidden costs in recruitment. People often blame the market when recruitment feels slow. Sometimes that's fair. Good engineers are in demand. The competition can be fierce. But I think many delays happen long before a recruiter speaks to the first person. They're internal. They're operational. They're leadership decisions waiting to be made. You see, I've seen businesses spend 3 weeks debating a salary, not because they couldn't afford it, because, well, nobody wanted to make the decision. I've seen interview processes grow from 2 stages to 5, not because more information was needed, but because everybody wanted reassurance. I've seen brilliant engineers disappear from a process because nobody realised who was responsible for arranging the next interview. None of those businesses had a recruitment problem. They had a decision-making problem, and recruitment simply exposed it. And that's one of the reasons I find recruitment so fascinating. People think it's about finding engineers. I think it's one of the best health checks a leadership team can actually have because, well, recruitment exposes everything. Communication, ownership, decision-making, planning, trust, alignment. It shines a light on how a business really operates when it's under pressure. One of my favourite questions to ask leadership teams is this. If someone resigned tomorrow morning, what would happen next? Not eventually, not once everyone has a chance to think about it, immediately. Who owns the process? Who informs the recruiter? Who updates the job description? Who reviews the CVs? Who gives technical feedback? Who books interviews? Who keeps candidates informed? Who makes the final hiring decision? If those answers aren't crystal clear, there's work to do. Not because you failed, because uncertainty creates delay, and delay creates risk. Now, here's something interesting. Whenever I ask that question, people often answer with names. Well, John does that. Sarah normally handles this. Mark usually speaks to the recruiter. But that's not really the question. The question is about ownership. Because people change, people leave, people go on holiday, people get promoted. Processes should still work. If the process only works because one person happens to remember everything, it isn't really a process. It's a habit. And habits don't always survive pressure. Now, preparation isn't about creating huge manuals or overly complicated recruitment playbooks. It's simply about removing uncertainty. Sometimes it's as simple as agreeing. This is our interview process. These are our salary bands. This person owns recruitment. These are the behaviours we value in people. These are our non-negotiables. These are the questions we always ask. Simple, clear, repeatable. That's where confidence comes from. I often say the strongest recruitment processes aren't built during recruitment. Stay with me. They're built beforehand. Recruitment simply puts them into action. It's no different from cybersecurity. You don't build your disaster recovery plan after a ransomware attack. You don't decide your backup strategy after the servers have failed. You prepare before the actual crisis arrives. Why should people planning be any different? August, well, it's actually one of my favourite months to work with MSPs. Not because recruitment stops. It doesn't. Great engineers move all year round. But August often gives leadership teams something incredibly valuable: space. Not endless amounts, just enough breathing room to think. The phones are sometimes a little quieter, projects pause, decision makers are slightly easier to pin down. It's one of the few opportunities during the year where businesses can lift their heads above the day-to-day work and ask, where are we actually going? Do we have the right structure? Where are we becoming too independent on one individual? Which engineers are ready for more responsibility? Who's carrying too much? Where are the bottlenecks? Which customers are driving the biggest growth? What skills are we going to need next year that we don't have today? Those are leadership questions. Recruitment is simply one of the outcomes. I also think August is a brilliant time to look at succession planning. Not because somebody is leaving, because, well, eventually somebody will. That's just business. People get promoted, people relocate, people change careers, people start families, people retire. And good businesses don't panic when that happens because they've already thought through about what comes next. Ask yourself this. If your technical director disappeared for 3 months, what would happen? Would the business continue? Would projects continue? Would customers notice? Would somebody naturally step into that space? Or would everything stop? See, that's not a recruitment question. That's a leadership question. The same applies to your service desk. If one senior engineer left tomorrow, where would the pressure land? Would your junior engineers feel supported? Would your team leaders suddenly become overwhelmed? Would your customers notice longer response times? Those answers tell you far more than your organisational chart ever will. I sometimes think recruitment gets unfairly blamed for exposing problems that, well, already existed. The role isn't always the issue. Sometimes a vacancy simply shines a spotlight on weaknesses that have been quietly growing for months. That's uncomfortable, I know, but it's also incredibly useful because now you know where to improve. So here's a challenge for every leadership team listening today. Before summer disappears completely, book one meeting, just one. No recruiter, no vacancy, no job adverts, no CVs. Just your leadership team, and ask yourselves 4 questions. What roles are most likely to become important over the next 12 months? Who owns recruitment when we need to hire? Does everyone understand our interview process? If somebody resigned tomorrow, would we genuinely be ready? Not, we'd probably work it out. Ready. Because there's a difference. If the answer to any of those questions is, I'm not sure, well, you've just found something worth working on. Not because you're behind, because you've identified an opportunity before it became a problem. And that's good leadership. I think one of the biggest differences between reactive businesses and intentional businesses is timing. You see, reactive businesses make decisions because, well, they have to. Intentional businesses make decisions because, well, they've chosen to. And that's a very different mindset. And over time, those small differences compound. They recruit faster, they make decisions better. They communicate more clearly, their teams feel more confident. Their customers experience more consistency. Not because they work harder, because they've actually prepared. You see, preparation creates confidence. Confidence creates momentum. And momentum attracts great people. And great people help businesses grow. So perhaps this year, don't wait until September to start thinking about September. Use August for what it can be. A planning month, a thinking month, a leadership month. Because the strongest MSPs don't recruit well because they're brilliantly under pressure. They recruit well because they did the work before pressure arrived. And that's a lesson that reaches far beyond recruitment. Thank you so much for spending part of your day with me. I really appreciate you choosing to listen. If today's episode encouraged you to think a little differently about planning, leadership, or recruitment, I'd love you to share it with another MSP owner or leader who might find it useful. Because recruitment isn't about filling jobs. It's about building businesses that are ready for whatever comes next. So, until next week, keep asking better questions, be intentional, and above all, guys, stay wild.